forgot to do that. So we are recording this for the benefit of any who are not able to attend. So if you are unable to be here, we welcome you vicariously to our session today. And so again, this is a map of where everybody's coming from. Have a variety of roles that people play in terms of their profile that they shared with us. So you can see it's kind of a broad set of perspectives that are held by those, at least those who registered for this workshop. And so the majority, of course, would be researchers and educators, consultants, and then we do have some students and managers joining us today. So I think it's interesting to see kind of the unique profile that we have. In terms of questions that have been raised in expectation for what we're going to discuss today, this is a ChatGPT summary of about 40 responses. So I think it did a reasonably good job of capturing some of the basic questions that you bring. So front and center, understanding the basics of reviewing, what constitutes a high quality review, any guidelines and tools for reviewing, and then some questions about how to deliver constructive, developmental, balanced feedback, potential to bring some of our background into the reviews that we offer. There are a few questions about methods or the content of reviews, and then just some general questions about the expectations and standards for reviewing in the Academy of Management. So this just gives us a little bit of a sample of the energy that brings you to our gathering today. So we have, actually Jody is not with us at this time. I think she's going to be joining us just a little bit later. Jody is the division program chair. These are these three officers of the division are those who are responsible for the program this year. And so Jody Hoffer-Gattel is the division program chair. And James Vardaman is the division program chair-elect. The two of them are overseeing all of the reviews and selection processes associated with the program that runs from basically Sunday-ish through the end of the academy on Tuesday afternoon, evening. And Richard Hall is our division PDW chair, professional development workshop chair, and he's responsible for reviewing and selecting the professional development workshops that will be included in the program for our division from Thursday and Friday, and I think there'll be one or two on Sunday as well. So we welcome them. We have with us James and Richard, and I think we'll be hearing primarily from James, but Richard, we'll invite you. And Richard, do you have any formal remarks to share with us? I just want to make sure I'm tracking what we need to include here.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect, David. Doing a great job. Happy to contribute as required. So yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction.
Okay, wonderful. And so we'll definitely draw on your expertise and perspective when we get to the Q&A portion of our meeting. And I also want to welcome Laura Fay, who is the division community engagement officer, and she's doing a fantastic job of helping us to queue up a variety of experiences and events that are helping us to build community across the division. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to turn the time to James to lead us in a discussion. So James, take it away.
Thanks, David. So David, am I able to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to start off by saying I'm going to start off just with some slides, go through some sort of best practices for reviewing. I know that reviewing can be kind of intimidating, especially when you haven't done it before. And even for folks who are early on in their career, might not always know exactly what a good review looks like. That's not something that our, one of the big criticisms of a lot of our doctoral programs is, is that people learn the basics of writing papers and doing data analysis, but they don't really learn the ins and outs of the profession, things like reviewing or some of those professional norm type things. And so I've designed this little presentation just to kind of give you some high level insights on what that should look like, what a good review looks like, some sort of do's and don'ts. That's sort of the thing that David presented a few minutes ago, showing sort of these 8 ideas that we want to cover. A lot of that's going to be covered in this presentation, not all of it, but a lot of it. And so if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to kind of go through some of these ideas for you. And, when I conclude that, if you want to jot some things down, you can ask questions of all the senior people on here who've done this many times. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in a second and get started.
No, that's good.
Let me see how to do this. Okay. Can everyone see a screen that says effective reviews?
Yes.
Okay. Effective reviews. So, this is just going to be sort of a primer on how to review effectively. What this looks like. Before I get started, and I'm sorry for doing this. I'm always, I'm uncomfortable talking about myself, but I do want to say, I just have this here to show you that I've done this before, and you can trust that I have experience editing and reviewing papers. And so this is just a little bit about my background, just so you can understand that I'm not some bozo off the street who's telling you what to, giving you this advice. This is gleaned from 20 years in the field of academia, and these insights have come from people who are much stronger than I am, teaching me these ideas. And so just wanted to throw that out there. So what makes a good review? So there's sort of a lot of people think you have to dig down deep into the details, and sometimes that's required. But from what I've gathered from talking to high-level academics over the last 20 years, people who have been journal editors at top journals, what they're really looking for in a good review is a clear big picture assessment of the manuscript. So just a clear assessment of, here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses. The theoretical contributions there or it's not. The methods are strong or they're not. You don't have to dig down into, on page 17, there's a misspelling, or things like that. The editors, and in our case, the program chairs, Jody and Richard and I are looking for are just sort of big picture assessments of the manuscript. We also want you to highlight the issues you find with the paper in a constructive way. And so what I mean here is, anytime you're being critical of a manuscript, is going to be somewhat pointed, but it doesn't need to be nasty. You can point out issues with it without being nasty. So one thing I've noticed, and we can talk about this in the Q&A, from the time that when I started versus now, and Richard might be able to speak to this after the presentation, and David and some other more senior folks. I think reviewers have gotten a little nastier since I started. I don't know if I attribute that to more of like the online message board culture or social media or whatever, but I feel like when I first started this profession, the reviews were a little more constructive, and as I've gone along, they've gotten a little nastier. It's gotten a little more, people, because there's anonymity in the review process, people tend to behave like they're on a message board of a Daily Mail or Guardian article online. And so be constructive, point out what's wrong, but do it in a constructive way. And then the third thing we're looking for are specific comments that the author can respond to. And so an example of this would be, I don't like your theoretical framing, would be a comment that a reviewer might make. Well, the author can't get much from that because you haven't told them an alternative, or you haven't said, your social capital framing might be off. I prefer a social network framing or something like that. You're not providing an alternative. You're not really providing insight that's actionable. So try to provide a clear big picture assessment of the paper. Try to highlight the issues that you're seeing with the paper in a constructive way, and then make the comments specific enough that the author can take something from them and move the paper forward, address what's wrong. comments that are sort of non sequiturs or that are really too general for the author, it's not very useful for the author. And it also doesn't help us when we're assessing the manuscripts as the program chairs make a stronger assessment of the paper. So next I'm going to get into sort of some of the nuts and bolts of what a review might look like. Okay, what a good review might look like, both for us as program chairs and for the author. So this is how to sort of structure a quality review. In your opening paragraph, generally what I like to do, and this is sort of what I've picked up from editors of Journal of Management and other journals, it's always a good idea to open up by summarizing the paper. So summarize the aim of the paper. This paper seeks to shed light on social capital and organizational change or something like that. You want to just sort of summarize the aim of the paper. And the reason you want to do that is because that signals to the author that you've read their work. The authors always want to know, that have the validation that you've read their work. Another thing that's a good practice is to highlight a positive or two. You're going to spend most of your review critiquing the paper. You're going to spend most of the review pointing out what's wrong, for lack of a better phrase. And so it's always good in that opening paragraph to highlight something positive about it. Even if it's, if you're struggling to find something positive, I'll give you a great example. My first submission to AMJ, which was over 20 years ago, sadly, the only positive that they could find was it was formatted according to Academy guidelines, but they did put that in the review. That was it. That was in that opening paragraph. It was things to like about your paper. It's formatted according to Academy guidelines. So at least they were trying to cushion that blow some. So you want to highlight a positive or two in the opening paragraph just to sort of cushion the blow, because you're going to spend the rest of the time, which is your job, critiquing the paper. And so provide some signal to the author that you know what they're doing, provide a positive or two, and then move into the critique. Okay. And I gave you the data set that you used is excellent, or things like that. Those are positive comments. From that point, you're going to pivot to the issues you have identified at a high level. However, there are also issues that harm the paper's contribution. And then optionally, you can summarize the issues there before you get into them in a point-by-point basis, or you can just say there's issues here and now I'm going to talk about it. And so that opening paragraph is meant to sort of set the stage and signal to the author that you've read their work and that you do see at least some positives in it. Okay. And so I sort of summarize that here on this slide. Establishes that you gave care of the review, you were fair, and it will help ease the impact of those negative comments. So that's your opening paragraph. So from there, you're going to move into the critique, the actual identification of the issues with the paper. And you can put positive things. If you like something in the paper, you can put it here. But this is mostly going to be critiquing the manuscript, okay? And so a few things in organizing the body of your review. Number your comments. So the reason for that is because program chairs, associate editors, if you're doing it for a journal, they need to be able to point to these things when they're summarizing the feedback. Now, for a conference submission, it's not quite as important because those program chairs, we're not going to be doing as much summarizing as we would if we were doing journal editing. But it's still helpful to number your comments, because that gives the author something they can wrap their heads around. They can look to point 1 is about the theoretical contribution. Point 2 is about the cross-sectional design or something like that. And so you want to number your comments as best practice. So I have here provide at least 4 comments. I meant to write 4 to 5 there. For a journal, I typically encourage 7. This is a conference. Have at least 4 to 5 comments. You don't have to go beyond that unless you want to. I mean, obviously, if you want to go further, that's great. But the minimum, you should be able to highlight 4 things with the paper, at least at minimum. Give the program chair, something to look at, something to, some critique of the paper. Many times when we have untrained reviewers at conferences, sometimes you'll just get a paragraph, 1 paragraph, which is really hard as a program chair to sort of come to a strong conclusion about the manuscript from that. So you want to invest the time to do at least 4 to 5 comments about the paper. Give the authors sufficient feedback, and then also give the program chairs the opportunity to make an assessment from your critique. Okay. The way to organize them, this is a judgment call. This is up to you, but typically people organize them in one of 2 ways. They either go most important issue to least important issue, or they do it just chronologically. So chronologically, it would be, comment 1, the introduction, fails to problematize the issue in some way. Comment 2 would be the theory looks good. Comment 3, there's problems with the methods, and then comment 4, I like your discussion, whatever. That'd be chronological, the order that they appear in the paper. Most important would be, hey, you've got a cross-sectional design which isn't appropriate for this type of study, and you want to put that right up front because that's the most important thing. It's however you choose to go about doing it, but organize it in one of those two ways. Either way you feel most comfortable. So some things not to do. Some things not to do. You shouldn't, even if you really love or really hate the paper, even if you really love it or really hate it, don't write that the paper should be accepted or rejected in your review. So that's the associate editor's, or in our case, the program chair's decision. You're giving them your assessment of the paper. You're giving them the strong reasons either to accept or to reject in your comments, but you don't get to make that decision. And the problem with putting, because you might say, well, hey, what's it matter if I suggest it should be accepted or rejected? A lot of times that puts the associate editor or the program chair at a conference in a box. So now the program chair has to either accept a paper that you've said should be rejected or accept a paper that you've said should be rejected. That creates dissonance and it creates a sense of unfairness for the author. And so try not to box in your program chair or your editor if you're reviewing for a journal by saying it should be accepted or rejected. It might be pretty clear from your comments that you lean one way or the other with that, but don't say it explicitly. Trying to do that in your review, because again, you're putting the program chair in a box, and you might create dissonance for the author if you do that. Second, try to give vague comments. Vague comments can either not point to a page number, or it can be, like I said earlier, like, I don't like your method, or I don't like this theoretical framing. Try to be specific in your comments. And if you're going to criticize something, provide an alternative. If, for example, with the theoretical framing, or if you're going to criticize something, explain why. It shouldn't just be, I don't like this, or this is not appropriate. Put why it's not appropriate. Put why you don't like it in the comment. And that'll help the author improve their paper when they get that feedback. And the third one, I'm less, rigid about this one. When I say do not highlight minor issues, I just mean like the core of your review should not be highlighting typos or misspellings or things like that. If it's a glaring problem, yes. If it's a glaring problem that's really distracting from the manuscript, yes. If it's a one-off, don't make that a core part of your review. If you want to point that out to the authors, just to help them going forward, put it at the very end of your review. Hey, I caught this typo. You might want to address this on page 22. That kind of thing. Don't make highlighting minor issues like typos or misspellings or things like that, grammar issues, as a core part of the review, unless it's glaring, or if you want to do it at the very end of the review, just to sort of help out the authors identify that going forward. Okay, so focusing your review. This is just a few tips for those of you who might be novices to reviewing. I just got a couple of slides left here. I just want to talk to you about some things you might look for in the paper. Looking at the introduction or motivation for the study. So does the introduction identify a gap or a tension in the literature? Well, that's something to look for in the introduction. Just, is the paper motivated? Have the authors created this excitement for the reader, hook the reader by identifying a gap or theoretical tension? Have they stated what their theoretical contributions are in the introduction? That's something you might look for. That's something that authors, depending on, generally need to do, is identify what the contribution of the work's going to be. So that's something you can look for in the introduction. Are the data generalizable and free of causality concerns? So, for example, is the sample size large enough? So a lot of times some people look for sample size issues and they say lack power. Well, like statistical power. Well, if they've got findings that are supported, they've got enough statistical power to find it. But the problem with the small sample size is it might not be generalizable. It might not be a large enough sample to generalize, or the sample might come from such a unique context that it won't generalize across context. So look for generalizability and causality issues. If they've got a cross-sectional design, is the research question they're asking appropriate for that? Does the research design match sort of the questions that they're asking, the study that they're doing. Do they have the appropriate analysis? If they're for example, hypothesizing that there's causality or some kind of linear process, are they doing a t-test or an ANOVA, which might not be the appropriate method for that? And so sort of assess those types of things when you're talking about data and methods. Some final tips here. Try to hit the high notes. Again, program chairs, editors at journals, we're not looking for you to dig in and find every, find every little tiny thing. What we're looking for, that'll be, what we're looking for is big picture issues. Is the contribution strong? Are the methods appropriate? Have they completed all sections of the paper, and is the paper filled out? Is it strong? It's fine to be direct, but don't be nasty. And if you address small things, be sure to clarify they're glaring or you're just bringing it to their attention. You don't have to nitpick people. That's really not the point of the process. The point is to sort of give overall feedback of the paper, and again, like hit the high notes. And so these practices, these ideas I've come up with for talking to senior editors and from top journals over the years, from serving on program committees of conferences over the years. And I hope that these are helpful to you. And David, and Richard, or anyone else, I don't know if Jody's joined us yet, are all available to answer questions. So thank you.
David, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes. So let's give everybody a virtual applause. Appreciate James for providing that good introductory presentation. I do want to welcome to our gathering Jody Hoffer-Gattel. And so we're going to add you to the spotlight here along with.
Thank you. David, you sent out a new link that I went to and I was waiting in the waiting room. And I thought, kind of lonely. So I clicked this one instead. So I'm glad to be here.
I'm sorry about that confusion.
Yeah, that's all right. It's good to be here. Hi, Richard.
So we have James, Jody, and Richard are the three chairs for this year's program. And what I'd like to suggest is that we just take stock of what you've heard and what questions may remain. So I'm going to employ a technique that my good colleague and friend Steve Cady calls the chat waterfall. Okay, so here's how to do a chat waterfall. Everybody will write for 30 seconds what's one insight or question that you heard from this presentation. So you write for 30 seconds, and when I say go, everybody pushes return at the same time, and we get a whole cascade of answers all at once. Okay, so the question I want you to write an answer to in the chat. What insight did you receive, or what question would you like to raise from James's presentation? We got 30 seconds to type an answer. I'm going to push enter or return in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. Good. Okay. Good. Okay, so let's look through the comments here. Let's see. Joan, Jarrett, to everyone, will we have the benefit of any written guidance for first-time reviewers? Actually, I'm going to send out a link to a document we created last year. And I think somebody else might already be in there. So I'll send out an example of some tips that we compiled after our reviewers.
Is this the document that Laura shared? Laura
Yes,
Fay in the
it's
chat?
the one and the same. Okay, so she beat me to it. Okay, so yeah, so we'll provide you with just some written suggestions that capture some of what James has shared, and we can also post James's slides as a response to this. All right, so Jody, I'm going to invite you to read through these comments. And do you see one or a question that you would like to take?
Hmm.
And then Richard, you'll be up next. Okay.
Hmm. A lot of these are comments more than, yeah. Is it okay if a managerial reviewer focuses more on the practical aspects of the articles? That's an interesting one, because one thing I took a note on as I was hearing James is this is the ODC division, and we do care about the practical implications. That's a big part of our division. And so I would say yes, and I hope that the reviewer submission matching algorithm has resulted in some kind of mix of academic and practitioner reviewers, because people would probably value feedback on both. But you should give feedback on the areas where you feel knowledgeable. And if you read a submission and say, kind of interesting, but I don't see how they don't make any case for what a real person might do with this information or these findings in their work. That's great feedback. And the person who wrote that submission may respond by including that in their presentation. So I would give feedback or say, the method that you're talking about of doing organizational change. There's some other methods that you might study that are more promising. Yeah, you give feedback from your area of knowledge. So I would say yes, that could be quite useful, especially in this division. Any other thoughts?
I just add to that. That would be a great a comment, especially if you're addressing implications of the paper. So I think that managerial and practitioner perspective will be especially helpful when making observations about how that paper can be applied. All right, Richard, do you see a question you'd like to address?
Yeah,
James, you'll be up next. So look through the chat and see if you can find another one you want to address. So go ahead, Richard.
Oh, there's lots there, and I think the commentary and the questions just underlines the utility of James's overview there. Great work, James. Absolutely agree with everything you said there, and I think people are picking up on the most important stuff. And I do want to highlight that the high notes in particular. Okay, you got to remember, folks, a number of you have made comments and asked questions about it's helpful to understand that for us, the contribution you're making here is making our job easier and helping us to make a better informed judgment about whether to accept or reject. Very competitive process. We've got a lot of submissions out there. We've got a lot to get across and understand, okay, folks? So that's why I think also that summary of what is the contribution of the paper. Okay, so what contribution is it making on the practitioner perspective, the theoretical perspective, is really very, very helpful for us to check, because we're looking at these papers, not always being able to read them as much detail as we'd like. So it's a great way to check and say, yeah, we thought that's what that paper was about. The other one, first-time reviewer questions, there's a few there, absolutely. You're wondering what sort of guidance, and obviously James given great guidance. Those tips are really important there. Okay, so your job, all right, first of all, is to give us that overview and that assessment about the contribution of the paper. I think that framing of it is really great. So think about that. I always found when I was starting out reviewing, focusing on what is clear and what is not clear. Okay, so the biggest problem for us is papers that really don't know what they're doing, a paper or a symposium that's not clear on where its contribution is, what questions it's answering, and why it might be of utility or value to our audience are the ones we probably want to reject, right? So as a first-time reviewer, help us by explaining what's really clear in this paper and what's not clear. It's not clear where its contribution is. They're really useful signals for us in terms of trying to understand that. And I think when you're stepping into the review process, that's maybe potentially a useful framing for you. So there's the two things. Tell us what the contribution is, where its strengths and weaknesses are, and why. In terms of those critical comments about, again, for first-time reviewers, remember what James said there. It's not a matter of what you like or what you don't like. Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say of value, and will it help us make a judgment, and will it help the author make their paper or their symposium or their contribution better, right? So that means, as James said, always be in the business of saying, if you had have done this, or this is what good looks like, or this is a better way forward, or consider the alternative of doing it in this way, right? I need more of this. I need to clarify, and this is what clear would look like. It would provide more examples of this. It would provide counter cases. It would provide examples in the literature which are different, you know. So being as specific as you can is really, really helpful for authors and very, very helpful for us. I love that comment. I think it's Cheryl Mitchell out there comment about the, the developmental approach that you're taking to the review is really something that I want to really underline and underscore. What else have we got there that I did pick up on? The literature review and problematization is the reviewer expected to be familiarization with the literature. Not necessarily. I mean, you're obviously matched up as best as possible with papers and symposium to review that align with your area of expertise or experience. But really, it's that judgment about even telling us what literature it is making a contribution to, how it seems to be located within the various debates and issues is in of itself very, very helpful. So it's not so much that you're expected to critique the quality of the literature review necessarily. If you are familiar with that, that's great. But if you're not, you can still make a judgment by telling us, what sort of contribution it might make to a particular branch or area. I suppose the other thing I'd want to say on that is too, we are particularly in this division always interested in those approaches which can bring together, different bodies of literature. We are interested to the extent to which the papers or contributions might be innovative, the ways in which it might be moving things forward. We are interested in papers which I suppose are making contributions and bolder contributions and bringing together in novel ways different insights. So it's always useful to know that. That's perhaps enough from me, David.
Okay, so let's actually build on that last point. Another way of framing that question is like, what level of expertise should I be expected to have when I'm like doing a paper review? And this is I'd love your comments on that. My perspective on this is sometimes I'm asked to review a paper where I don't have a lot of expertise. And so what do I have expertise in? It can be the construction of an argument, making sure that the technical aspects of the paper are presented. And as a non-expert, I can offer a very good review from a non-expert perspective because the paper should speak to both experts and non-experts in the topic. So you don't have to be expert in the literature of that paper to be able to provide high quality review, especially if you're trying to convey to the authors how that paper comes across to a non-expert. Would you add anything else to that, Jody, James, or Richard?
I'll just say,
sorry,
go ahead, Jody.
Go ahead, James.
I'll just say, I agree. I mean, I think that you can still provide expertise if I provide good feedback to the authors without being an expert in the area. One of my mentors was the editor of Journal Management, and he would use me as like, when he had a paper he couldn't find a fit for, he would be like, you review it for me as a favor. And so what I would try to do a lot of times would be areas outside of my expertise. I would find, if I wasn't sure about an argument, I would look up a paper or two that they were citing. No, and it's not when you're asked to review, you don't have to go find every paper they cited in the manuscript, but I'd find a paper or two just to make sure that if I thought it was an important point, I want to make sure they were being true to what they were trying to say. And so you don't have to overly invest your time like that, but you can still provide, if the arguments ring true to you, you can provide that, or they don't, you can provide that feedback. And I think that you can still provide useful feedback without being an expert.
Jody, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add something to a slightly different topic, which is the role of positive feedback. James, I think you're right about having that up front and throughout where it's appropriate. And I have a different rationale maybe for why I think it's like really valuable information. Not only what doesn't work, but what does work, because especially a junior person, and maybe this was just me, but I know others that do this, you end up throwing out the baby with the bathwater. If, it's a critical review and every point of critique could be accurate, but if they don't point out like the gems, you can just lose track of that and either become demotivated or just confused and make the paper worse, or the submission worse. So those gems, whether they're small or huge, need to be pointed out just so it helps to orient the author or team of presenters so they don't lose that as they try to make it better.
Yeah, that's a great observation. We have a follow-up question to the expert, non-expert. So that's the question is, should the reviewer reveal she is not expert in the literature? And I guess my perspective on that is it's fine to disclose whether or not you are expert, and to disclose the perspective you are going to adopt in a review. I think that actually can help the authors to understand the point of view. So I think that's perfectly acceptable. So and I'm seeing some head nodding, so I think, come on, I think we're aligned in that. Jody, what is your take on this question? How long should an ideal review be? When does it become too long?
Gosh, well, I would say for a journal review, it can be really long if it's constructive. I do not mind a 10-page review and a journal review, especially when they're providing detailed kind of feedback and examples and alternatives, all the stuff that James suggested. Long can be great. For this, I mean, again, it's more the quality than the quantity. I don't think there may be a limit in the template for how much you can provide. We don't expect as much for the journal for this conference review process, so feel free to keep it much shorter than 10 pages. But you know, if you're feeling really generous and really motivated, then and it's high quality, then don't hold back.
Yeah. If I could offer our perspective on that one, it depends a lot on how much time you could.
Yes.
And for the annual meeting reviews, we're asking for 3, and some of you may even have 6 reviews to do within a very short period of time. So you do have to economize how you're using your time. And so I'd say I really appreciate what James said. You want to, for a good academy review, is 4 to 6 points is sufficient. But the reviews that are not helpful at all are just 1 or 2 lines, like, oh, I liked this paper, it seems relevant, and then they break it. That's not a terribly useful review. So having some description that's that justifies your recommendation is very, very helpful.
James' point about choose a way to sequence your comments, either chronologically through the paper, which I tend to do, or level of importance, like start with the really big issues and then get to some little nitty-gritty ones toward the end, but be consistent so the reader can really follow it. Yeah.
So Jody, maybe you could take this question too. And it's a very basic question. How does the whole review process work? Where does
there's this
might help actually, because this is a really great question, because we're sort of assuming everybody kind of understands it, like the paper and it goes to somehow. So let's maybe walk through the steps.
I'll tell the parts that I know about, and then you tell me about some parts that maybe I haven't seen yet because I'm the program chair for the first time. But I got some additional insights this year as program chair. First of all, obviously submissions are due on in early January. They get sorted by the type of submission, and then they get checked in based on whether they meet the requirements. If they clearly do, they just get checked in automatically. If it's kind of a judgment call, the 3 of us will check them in based on, is it something minor and it's not a big deal, we'll check it in. And then the ones that are checked in get matched with all the people like yourselves who've generously signed up to review. And that's an automated process that's carried out by the Academy of Management kind of super team at the top of the organization based on keywords, et cetera. And we give a couple of specifications as a division of what kind of rules of matching do we want. And And now we have deadlines to finish the reviews. Once those reviews are complete, and we're really glad, I mean, just being here is a really good sign that you are dedicated, and we so much appreciate you. But we hope to get reviews from everyone who's promised. And then each of us, Richard for the workshops, James for the symposia, and myself for the papers, will read through the reviews. The way they come back to us, it's a very automated platform, which is nice. They will be, we can easily rank them by the from the highest scores to the lowest scores in terms of how the reviewers kind of aggregated across the 2 or 3 who reviewed the paper. How high is the ranking on a couple of categories, including recommendation to include in the program. And we could just say, oh, we've got 100 of these and only 30 slots on the program. We'll take the top 30. But that's usually not the best way to do it. We'll look through and make sure, kind of assess for ourselves what we see in the reviews. Some people might say great things, but still rate it kind of low. There's a kind of people have their own ways of rating things. So looking at the content of the review can be more helpful than just looking at the numerical rating to get a sense of, is this a good fit for the program, and will it be attractive to our to participants? So we make those final choices within the constraints of how many spots we have available on the program. We have a certain number of PDWs, it's probably percentage-wise, a certain number of symposia and a certain number of papers that are allowed, and then we choose them and you get notified. But the reviews are critical, not just the number that you place on there, but the actual content of what you write.
Thank you, Jody. That was helpful, I think, to go through that step-by-step process. So, John Malia, I think that's how you state your name. It just kind of, I think, is summarizing. So the point about an overall accept reject choice, any suggestions on how to strike this balance, recognizing the final decision is up to program chairs. And then John goes on to point out that last year he had 6 papers reviewed. He recommended 2 be rejected, etc. And so there can be, I think what the point of this is that sometimes the recommendation of the reviewer is or is not followed. So any comment on like how the chair makes decisions when you might have 2 reviewers say we love it, 1 reviewer says it should be rejected, and like how you sort through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's part, if there's a reviewer who just says, I love the paper, please, you know, that will carry a lot less weight than one that's really given it thought. So we have multiple reviewers, and we don't just look at them additively. We might give them different weight depending on the different areas of expertise they bring to the table. That's what I would say, but I think each of us might have a different approach. So I'd love to hear from James and Richard.
I'll just note that before you get it stuck in there, James, that John's observations there look spot on. These are the reasons why you would recommend rejection, right? I know you say they're the 2 papers cut and pasted into that, and the other because there was no data research questions or theoretical contributions. Like exactly, like they're ones that if I felt that about the paper, I could justify that, and I documented that, I'd recommend reject. Like I'm one of those reviewers that, if in doubt, I'd say up to the journal authors, I'd recommend strong consideration or acceptance. So if it's clear, if it's making a contribution, if you feel like the contribution is within the wheelhouse of ODC and you feel as though it's something that people would benefit from listening to and would make a valid contribution, I'd be recommending that be accepted. We are not going to be able to accept and take all the papers that were recommended for acceptance. There's just way too many submissions. We're going to have to make some tough choices. So that's where, as Jody said, the quality of the information insight that you give us is gold. But that's where I stand on the issue. I'm not sure if you're different, James.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, you have to understand that, I mean, there is still some subjectivity to this whole situation. The reason that your program chairs and your editors at journals tend to be more senior people who've been at this for a long time is because there has to be this understanding of what constitutes sort of a fatal problem versus a solvable problem, for lack of a better word. And so, for lack of a better phrase, so reviewers have varying levels of experience and understanding and topic fit. And so it's our job to kind of consider all those things with the review comments and make a decision about the paper. And so I'll give you just from my own, I've been an associate editor at several journals, and I've just outright rejected papers that had sterling reviews because I've seen through the problem to say, hey, this is a shortcoming that's going to make it fall short of the standards for this journal. And even though these reviewers, have positive assessments, they haven't noticed this part. And so, and I've seen this part, and that's where you kind of have to trust the expertise of the program chairs and the editors, so to speak, on seeing these things. There's been other situations where I've gotten to reject recommendations and given a revision or given an acceptance at a conference because, the reviewers see something as being a real fatal problem, but it's really not. And so, your guidance is really, really, really important because it brings these things to the attention of the program chair, but then the ultimate decision goes with the program chair. And that's because program chairs and editors have had years and years and years of experience and seen these things over and over and kind of have an understanding of what constitutes the contribution and all that. So, there is some subjectivity to it, but the decision is ultimately in pretty good hands. You can generally trust the decision makers on these things.
I love Christina's comment to what you're just saying. So good. So AI won't completely take the job of review in the future.
I'm really curious how many people here, maybe turn off the spotlight for a minute, who have our reviewers have all also submitted. Would that be like 100% typically, or?
You can do your the react at the bottom.
Yeah. I guess.
Okay, I'm getting kind of mixed. I'm sorry about that. There was some technical.
Yeah, I don't know, but
Yeah.
I guess in a way, it sounds like some of these questions you'd be curious about both as a submitter and as a reviewer, because this could be useful for you next year when you're submitting.
I was noting there's also a few nuts and bolts questions like how many reviewers are typically assigned to each paper, and then how will the review requests come? And at least when I was the chair, we tried to have at least 3 and sometimes 4 reviews assigned per paper. And the simple answer is it'll come by email. You'll get the request. Each paper will have its own email. So just look for those emails, and then it has links embedded to the actual papers. Have I got that right in this round, Jody?
Yeah, I think that's right. And as far as number, we started out, as some of you know, from seeing all of Ignacio's great updates. I think they were coming from me, but he was sending them out. That we started off with, we got like 100 more reviewers based on kind of begging. And so we have enough reviewers that every submission should have 3 reviews. Every submission has 3 reviewers assigned to it. The question is, do people come through? And if they don't, can we, paste another one in there? So our goal is 3, but at the very least 2 per submission. Because we want you to get multiple perspectives as a submitter, and the program chair wants to have multiple perspectives to be able to draw upon when we make our decisions.
Vladimir asks, is there any difference in how to review a paper and a poster, which is only an extended abstract? So this is the first year we're doing poster sessions. So what are your thoughts on that?
I haven't even seen a process for that yet. I saw a bunch were submitted, but they keep saying that happens later. So,
okay. So I think it's a big question mark, right?
My prediction is obviously the shorter and perhaps more constructive reviews might be appropriate. I think it's likely that posters are more likely to be submitted by early career researchers, doctoral students. So I'd advocate taking a very constructive approach, those of you who are reviewing posters.
All right, Alice wrote, when review, there's a question. This is a question that's unique to the ODC Division review process. This says, this review is done from a practitioner, academic, or hybrid perspective, or something like that. How do you answer that? And so that question, you just answer that from the perspective of the hats that you see as kind of your dominant identity. That would be my answer to that question. But I think that it's helpful to the program chair to know kind of the perspective that you're coming from as you share your review. So that is, I think that's the last question in the review form. So at least it was. Yeah. Is that anything you want to add to that one?
I haven't even seen the process yet for posters, so I think that comes later. And unless some of you have seen it, and I
Well, and at this question, just be specific. This was for all reviews, not just
got it.
right.
Okay.
Another one. What are the current popular topics in ODC? That's a great question. Anybody want to offer perspective on that one?
I'd love to hear from everyone. There are a bunch of them, but the one that we highlighted in our call for papers this year, because there was no overall AOM theme for Copenhagen. From my time in Scandinavia, one thing I realized is they take really seriously multi-stakeholder approaches to change and hearing the different voices, whether it's, you know, a national policy change or at the organizational level or the municipality or whatever, cross-sectoral. So one thing we were particularly welcoming this year were multi-stakeholder processes of change with a focus on the relationships among the stakeholders in solving the challenges. And that seems pretty relevant for us in the US right now, given the complexity of the challenges we're facing and the differences we have to bridge in order to get to any solutions that will work. So that's, I think, one of the most interesting things for OD people to be looking at right now, but that's just my perspective.
So I'm just glancing through the questions here to see if we missed anything. I love some of the insights from Renak, and forgive me for the pronunciation, Renak. Be direct, but be nice to the authors. I think that's very important. Let's see. Oh, Colleen asked, what resources would you recommend to help evaluate whether the method is appropriate? And so the particularly, you know, so there are specific guidelines for rigor, depending on if it's a qualitative paper or a quantitative paper or a conceptual paper, right? So what thoughts do you have on how to evaluate the quality of the methods or the approach?
It's tough. I mean, that's really an expertise issue for you. You know, one thing that I do for our doc students here, even though we really don't have any qualitative researchers here anymore, John Amos left years ago, and I still do like a week in doc seminars just to teach them what good qualitative methods look like, even though they're not going to do them. I mean, I would say, you know, do your homework. And if you don't have expertise, I would say note that in the review. Just be like, I don't know about the method here because I don't have the expertise in this method. I mean, I think that disclosure might be the best bet there. That is a really tough question and a really good question. I'm sorry I don't have more insight.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, it is, yeah, you draw on the training that you have when it comes to your particular focus on methods and note your limitations of what you do and don't know. So there will be boundaries to what your methodological training is because the methods are like so many now. But I think I would agree with James. If you highlight where the perspective you're coming from, you should be on safe ground.
Hey, David, I can just suggest, I noticed that our division chair, Patrice Rosenthal, is out there. She had a comment. I'm not sure if Patrice wants to make observation, but she did observe that watch out for the fact that you might not get all the reviews in one batch. There might be a late review owing to the process because we just need to plug a gap. So just because you get a batch of reviews, keep a lookout in case there are some a little later in the process. Is that right, Patrice?
That is right. That is right. And the only other comment I want to make is how helpful. I'm looking at the chat, and some people I know on this call are messaging me directly and personally, just how wonderful this workshop has been. I've been doing this a while, and you've helped me think about some things and ways to do it. So it is true. And it might be worth saying how much we thank you, for signing up, for coming along to this, so you'll do the highest possible quality job, which we know you will. How important it is if you can possibly do your reviews pretty quickly after you receive them. You know, one challenge sometimes in managing this hugely important process is a lot of people sign up and either sometimes they don't pick up their papers, sometimes they pick them up, but life intervenes and they don't get the review done. And it is such an important undertaking. And so as fast as you can do it and as well as you can do it will be really, really appreciated. Given that inevitably, not everybody who receives a paper completes the review, you know, that's a piece of reality. It could be that even though you don't receive a paper, it's possible, even though you receive 1 or 2, not 3 papers, it's possible that later in the process, Jody and James will be kind of managing that process, watching how things come in. So it could be if you don't receive 3 papers now, it could be later in your email, you'll find one. And that will just be the result of some deft management on the part of our program chairs. So I just wanted to add that, but more generally, I want to add, this has really, really been helpful. This has been useful. Thank you. Thank you to my ODC colleagues for doing this.
Thank you, Patrice. And I didn't introduce Patrice at the beginning of our meeting, but this is our current division chair. Cordell, we'll answer your question, but I do want to acknowledge that we are now at the top of the hour, so it's 4 o'clock here in Eastern Standard Time. If you need to log off, we'll give you a miles or I call these train station moments, so feel free to log off if you need to, with our gratitude for your participation in our workshop today. For those of you who are still with us, I'd invite you to drop a 1-word insight takeaway. Like, what is your what is just a 1 word to describe your thought, your feeling as we finish today? And please drop those in the chat. We'd love to see those. So I'm seeing mutuality, thank you, inspired, development, inspired, thank you. Gratitude, happy, do it as soon as possible, exciting, ready, looking forward to Copenhagen, beautiful place, motivated, clarity, get a little heart there.
Rock and
Rock and
roll.
roll.
Mexico, yay.
Big picture. All right. Well, I hope you know, this in a virtual environment like this is hard to engage everybody as deeply as we'd like, but we hope this has given you a bit of a flavor for the culture in our division, and we certainly welcome you to join us and hope that we have more opportunity to get to know you personally, and invite you to become fully engaged in this wonderful community. So with that, let's go ahead and take, is Cordell still with us? Or Cornell, sorry.
I need to drop off, head downtown for a meeting. Thank you.
Okay, I think he had to jump off. So, all right then. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening, morning, day, or wherever you may be. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
One.
Jody, are we
Bye.
still meeting in an hour?